Before we jump into today's episode, if you haven't already, go check out Ostrich. We're all about improving your financial literacy, financial well-being, and helping you get to where you want to be financially. And we've actually rolled out a really cool program that I'm excited to announce. It's called Shares for Shares. And we're actually giving away shares of stock in our company for sharing our network and helping grow the network. So go to getostrich.com, sign up, start sharing, and you can earn a limited number of referral shares that we've got available. Hello and welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited you could join me today. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Now, on the Silicon Alley Podcast, I talk to entrepreneurs and top performers to understand what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. We get actual advice that you can apply in your own business and life. Now, on today's episode, I sit down with Judah Longgrear, co-founder and CEO of Nickelytics, an ad tech company in the mobility space. Now, before I jump into his background and why I'm so excited for today's episode, if you have not already, subscribe and follow the podcast so you get notified when a new episode drops every Friday. And when you hear something you like, please share the podcast on social media and with others that you think would get value. So my guest today, Judah Longgrear, is co-founder and CEO of Nickelytics. He's an entrepreneur through and through. From buying and running a coffee company at the age of 19 with just $5,000 to starting Nickelytics, which just finished the TechStars mobility program in Turin, Italy, and has a number of high-profile investors on the team. We go deep into building a tech company, raising money, pivoting, and having to deal with the backlash of pivoting and what accelerating after a pivot looks like. Now, before becoming the co-founder of Nickelytics, Judah was the founder and CEO of the Nickel Ride. The Nickel Ride was an eco-friendly, on-demand rideshare paid for by advertisers. This business grew to 5 cities, 60 advertisers, and provided over 100,000 free rides to Southwest Florida. Previous to his most recent entrepreneurial endeavors, Judah enjoyed significant success in the corporate world while setting strategy, leading diverse cross-functional teams, creative problem solving, and building partnerships as a business development executive at companies like Salesforce, Netapp, and Gartner. While working for those giants, he acknowledged the principle that mastery of measurement is the holy grail to growing a business, and now is applying the analytics that he has learned there to Nickelytics. So that's it for the intro. Let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Judah Longgrear.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place.
Judah, welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited to have you on and hear a little bit more about what you've been up to.
Hey, thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny, we overlapped at Gartner. We were both in sales over at Gartner and now have gone on to do different tech companies, and you've done some pretty incredible things since that time. So excited to jump into that and hear a little bit more about Nickelytics and how the business has evolved.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well, and definitely wish we could have connected more there during our time in Gartner. Certainly been a lot of great connections that came from that company. But definitely looking forward to getting caught up here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Judah, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and sort of entrepreneurial spirit? I think when you were 19, you had a coffee company and coffee business. So talk to me a little bit about your entrepreneurial nature experience.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So yeah, I guess that would be a good place to kind of kick things off. Kind of my entry into entrepreneurship. As you mentioned, I actually had a coffee shop when I was 19 years old and had absolutely no idea what it entailed running a business or what it would take to necessarily be successful, or just quite frankly, how difficult and taxing it is to try and grow a small business, right, with really no capital to make the improvements you want to. And the way that kind of happened, which I think is an interesting story, is my mother at the time was actually working at that coffee shop. She had just gotten her, kind of first job after all the kids had moved out of the house. And, she was working there just kind of part-time. And the business owner was shifting careers. He had 4 or 5 different coffee shops and was trying to just basically get out of the entrepreneurship hustle, if you will. So he was asking the employees if anyone was interested in buying the coffee shop. And she really had no interest in looking into that, but she said, hey, I know my son is into these types of business ventures, right? And at that time, I think the most credible business that I had ran was a eBay business and just some online stuff that was just starting to emerge. but she told me the idea. She kind of like pitched it to me, and I was like, oh, let me look into it. And he wanted, I think it was like $50,000 for the business, and I had like $5,000 in capital to my name. So I was like, yeah, sure. And so I called the guy. I said, hey, I'll give you $5,000 for it. I'll give you cash today. And he said, haha, no way. 5 months later, he called me and he said, okay, I sold all my other coffee shops. This is the last one. Let's do it. So I ended up like randomly getting this coffee shop at 19. It was losing money, but not too bad. It was in a hospital. So it was a pretty cool kind of setup there, because I knew that there was like a good amount of demand, right? Or a good amount of potential, customers, so to speak, because of the doctors and the nurses. You figured they'd have money, to spend on high-end coffee. And but the coolest thing was there's actually no rent either, right? Because they looked at it as an admittance to the hospital. So it was like a high risk, or high opportunity, low risk opportunity. So ended up figuring out that if we surveyed all the customers there that weren't buying the coffee and figuring out why they were getting the coffee in the hospital instead of ours, we found out that the biggest issue was the time. So we were able to implement a delivery system that actually took the coffee to the different floors so that doctors could have coffee kind of in between their breaks, as well as the nurses were able to grow that business, into at least sustainable and just making some money. Then ended up selling it at age 21 because it was absolutely like too much to try to do that while going to college. But that was when I had my first exit.
Nice.
But certainly not enough to, retire from there, let's just say.
That's awesome though. That's a really neat story. And like,
yeah, it was definitely,
like?
Honestly, man, it was like terrible and amazing all at once, right? Because I, like 19 years old, you kind of have this like sense of like, invincibility. And then all of a sudden you're just like running the business and you just start getting these letters from the government being like, hey, you need to pay this taxes, you need to pay that taxes. You're like, wait a second, okay, there's a lot more to it, right? Yeah. And then whenever you think you're making money, right, which is cash in the cash register, then all of a sudden you realize that you have to, pay employees, and then all of a sudden you start deducting all the other, expenses that go into it. It really gave me a crash course on like what it takes to run a business, right? And all be it on a very, very small scale. I think at the time I had like 3 employees at the most. One of them was my mother, so I'm not sure she was happy necessarily. Pitched me on the idea to buy this coffee shop, but it gave me a great appreciation, especially as I went to college, about knowing that entrepreneurship was something that like I really truly was passionate about. And at that time I knew I would eventually work for myself full time, and hopefully with a more, let's just say, scalable product at that later stage.
Yeah. No, that's really incredible. And I guess you were interested in business and entrepreneurship, or else your mom wouldn't have approached you with the idea.
Yeah. I guess it was just, maybe it's in our family, right? So grew up in a small town in West Virginia, and my parents certainly didn't have necessarily like an entrepreneurial background. My dad is actually a minister, but I think we were just always kind of like raised in a way of just go do stuff, like just go out there and do it. And so actually all my siblings actually have some sense of like their own business, or some sense of creating, jobs, whether it be just for their family or for, a small, medium-sized businesses. So I guess it has something to do with maybe how we were raised. And it was just that kind of like nature of just try it, right? And if you fail, it's okay. And so from an early age, I've always also been interested in money too. So just always been kind of trying to, let's just say, like find new ways of solving problems, creating opportunities just from looking at different ways to apply business models. That's just something, I guess it was just kind of born naturally. Certainly wasn't a skilled entrepreneur naturally, but I think just that inclination of like how I was wired from a young age certainly resonated with being a business owner to some level.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I don't know many moms that would turn to their 19-year-old and say, hey, you want to buy this coffee shop?
Exactly. I guess the conversation was more like, hey, there's someone trying to buy it, or he's trying to find someone to buy it. And then I said, oh, I'll buy it. Right. I think it was like, she's like, well, how? And I was like, I don't know. Let's just see what can happen. So yeah, it was something along those lines of like the dynamics of the conversation. I think she was a little shocked too. on the whole entire kind of transaction.
No, that's awesome. So talk to me about sort of how things progress from there. So you exit your first business successfully at the age of
Well,
at the age of
use
21.
that word. We'll use that word very, very loosely when we say exit successfully. We did sell it, and we paid off anything that we had invested in it, and it certainly wasn't too big of a payday.
Yeah, fair enough. No, yeah, I wasn't trying to say that you're able to retire,
Right.
but you did successfully sell the business and leave it.
Right.
So
right, it's all about the framework there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what was the next step after that? So are you still in college at this point?
Yep.
Talk about your career trajectory and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. So during the time, working the fruits of the labor of a small business like that, you really see like, okay, this is great, but obviously looking at what's next, and what, kind of the long-term goal for myself would be, I certainly saw that there was, just a need to get some formal education or continue the education, right? So during the time I did start enrolling in college, first was community college, then I did transfer to state college, so West Virginia University. And also too, I guess just part of that kind of nature is trying to get the most out of it. So I was involved in some entrepreneurship clubs there. I actually started one in college. Was involved in the business school there as well. And also once that happened, I wanted to, have money, disposable money. So I started working in sales.
Okay.
And that was just something that, I've worked ever since I was 16, whether it be for serving in restaurants or, a number of different industries. But then I got in sales, and that's where I kind of found a real opportunity of helping customers solve problems and leveraging technology to, create those solutions. So I started working in wireless sales. I was actually one of the top sales reps at the company for, local cell phone provider, which won me a trip to Jamaica. So nice. It was like all paid, expenses included, all that good jazz. And so that was kind of an opportunity where it's like, well, hey, there's a real opportunity of, applying yourself in hard work. You can make a name for yourself. So once I graduated college, I was probably 3 or 4 years of wireless cell phone experience, had an opportunity to grow with that company, but, I wanted to basically get the highest paying job, right? And, and so I took the job in Pittsburgh, for a company working in the commercial side of ADT. So it was doing like outside sales for Tyco Security, and I had a company car. So that was, base salary and a on-target earnings. And, I was hot stuff, man, rolling out of college with the company car. So I did that for about 8 months. And then I realized this is absolutely not for me, right? So it was very much one of those jobs that there's not a lot of upward mobility or a lot of upward, let's just say, career development. It was a lot of my colleagues I was working with were, essentially, twice my age, and, they were doing great there, but it was really just more of, you're in outside sales and that's what you're going to do. Right. So I started to think about, okay, well, I think I have a natural capability of succeeding in sales, but I think it's really important to have the right company backing and being at a company that is going to, provide you an upward mobility for your career development. And that's when I started to look into software and kind of IT companies, and ended up starting my career there, I would say, at a company called Netapp, and I moved from Pittsburgh to North Carolina. I can continue on the.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you bounced around a little bit in terms of industries, but it sounds like at each place you learned a little bit, right? So like from the coffee shop, it was like, okay, I need to be in something that's a little bit more scalable. Yeah. And then moving into, the cell phone industry and that sector, and then finding, okay, well, let me go into something that's, more focused on software and still even more scalable. Yeah. So yep. Yeah, I mean, anything that led you to like any like examples that like really stick out of like why that was so important or what you learned throughout that process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly one who's always kind of looking, I would say, in regards to what's next and like, what can I be doing more? And, am I applying myself? And I'm just I try to, right, from a self-awareness standpoint, try to be a sponge and learn as much as possible. And I saw that, if you just get out there and try and just do stuff, a lot of times you realize like, yeah, you might not be the most experienced, but if you have that, let's just say, tolerant for risk and not being afraid to fail, I think there's so much opportunity. And I was just, I was kind of like a kid in a candy store, and I was looking at, well, I have an ability to start to build this new career, to redefine myself as what I want to do. But at the time, it really was just being driven off of, okay, where can I make the most money? And right, I probably had some unreal expectations of what money meant and what that would, create. But then I would see like other students who are graduating, what their starting payment would be. And I said, well, hey, like this software as a sales thing is really interesting. There's perks, right? There's like, you have, beer Fridays, and then you have like ping pong tables. I was like, hey, this isn't a bad gig at all. And so I think it was just a little bit of like soul searching as like, what's going to fulfill me, right? Sure. I thought maybe going to a company with like a big name brand and all those perks would be it. So whenever I went to Netapp, had some success there on the business development side, just got recruited for Salesforce, which was kind of my dream job, right? Very, very top like brand to work for, amazing culture, amazing community. Everyone I was working with were like A players, right? It was in Atlanta too. And so I thought I would be there for a while, and actually was having some success there as well, just working really hard. But I was approached by like a company. And during the time when I got into Salesforce, I started to really think about like realizing like I'm not going to be fulfilled until I start to build my own thing again, right? That entrepreneurial bug started to rise up. Because at the end of the day, it was like, well, I'm creating wealth for other people, and there's limited like abilities for me to truly create and to build here. So I started to kind of have that resurface its head, right? And we're trying some projects on the side. Was doing some bootstrap like mobile app development. I'm not a technical founder myself, but it was just someone that was looking to kind of build that the product out and validate it to be able to fundraise on it. That couldn't really do it without giving it the right focus. So it's kind of between those two worlds. And then I got approached by Gartner, which was a really interesting opportunity, which I thought would be kind of the perfect way to solve both problems, right? Which is to have a paycheck, have benefits, but also have that that backing of a new company to start a new project, which was a business unit called Benchmark Analytics. And at the time, it was a new sales channel that Gartner was investing in. And I was one of the first 8 members to join that team, to be on the ground floor of kind of creating that product, that, go-to-market strategy. And so I thought that would be it, right? I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm crazy to leave Salesforce. But at the same time, like you gotta take these risks. And so I did that. And that's what took me to Florida. And did that for about a year and a half. And then same thing. I was like, okay, there's no more filling this void. I need to just get back out there and live in the crazy world of entrepreneurship. And that's been my last, let's just say, corporate paycheck that I've received and probably will ever receive.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's awesome. It's great to have made that progression, and you get something, a job that you think is going to be the one for you, the thing that you've been working for that fits all the boxes, and then you get there and you're like, you know what, maybe this really isn't it. And so having that kind of introspective opportunity, I think is huge. So
and I'll say one thing on that too, because I think it's an interesting topic. Like I would also say though, like trying to learn as much as possible and building a network no matter what position you are in. And while like you're able to look at, okay, well, maybe this isn't my long-term goal here, there is so much opportunity in the bubbles and the clicks and the engagements we are in. And I say that to say my first investor and a second investor actually I met at Gartner, right? And so it was actually my boss's boss was my first angel investor in the company that I started. And we have an investor from Salesforce too. So it's while it seems like it could be lost time or, just like it's certainly a lot of value that comes from just trying to get the most out of the situation that you're in, and building for your future at the same time, I would say.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And, I think that's a great perspective. No matter where you are, there's people that I'm sure you can click with, and you want to expand your network that'd be hugely valuable. So no matter if you end up in a position that you don't think is exactly where you want to be, there's definitely folks that are probably there, that are in a similar boat, or have, similar desires as you do. So you want to make sure that you connect with those folks and can kind of expand your network. So
Exactly.
So where did the idea for Nickelytics come from? And I don't believe it started as Nickelytics. There's a transition. So talk to us a little bit about the idea and how you actually started the business.
Yeah, happy to. So the original business, and again, I think a big theme today will be just iterations, right? Like you have this idea, and then you realize like it's not right, and so you have to kind of continue to look at it and test it. So this thesis that I've had and been very, very bullish on, and it's still kind of driving the company today from a vision perspective, is like the fact that transportation has a massive opportunity to be subsidized by advertising, right? I really believe that, if we look 10 to 15 years in the road, there's just so much opportunity to introduce smart advertising into the way we move around, right? And the way that transportation is paid for. So similar to how, TV has been paid for, how there's free TV, also how the internet has been paid for, it's really by advertising, right?
Yeah.
And there's these massive budgets that are put in transportation, and these massive companies, right, that are, helping to move people around, but just can't figure out how to become profitable. So I've had this kind of belief, core conviction, let's just say, for a while, and, but like winning some of these trips and traveling, which has been a big kind of focus of me. I love to travel. You see these alternate kind of themes of transportation, right? So like you'd be in South America, you'd be on a scooter or on this like little go-kart, and they'd have like a little advertisement on it. It's a free ride and you tip them or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like always stuck with me, and it was like pretty memorable. So the original business and the concept was a company called the Nickel Ride. So it was an on-demand free rideshare paid for by advertising. So I said, okay, well, we could take this concept of, last mile, subsidize it by getting advertisers to pay for it. We'll put technology in it, and we'll be a huge company, right?
Yeah.
And so I ended up pitching it to, actually, like I said, my boss's boss, got an investment. Again, we went out, started it, just no idea if anyone would actually pay for this. Got our first paying customers, launched in downtown Fort Myers, and it was a rideshare, so electric carts with 6-seaters that drove around, picked people up. At first it was a phone number. We then were approached by a second city to say, hey, we like that. Got some press. What would it look like to have this there? Was able to pre-sell, so it had like 50% of the revenue booked before we even invested in it. So was able to kind of grow from there, and then just kind of replicated that around 5 cities. I mean, there's this good kind of like value proposition from like cities having, green transportation, traffic mitigation, as well as, connecting the downtown commerce, right? Because it was really this kind of, small driver of economic, value that we were providing. And it was also helping, drivers make some additional income. So grew that to about 5 cities, and thought we were going to grow that pretty substantially. We tried to start our seed round and raise about $3 million. That was around the time that Uber went public, and the investor kind of appetite towards just transportation companies soured. Like, I guess they, had a very different opinion on like this. And we were able to raise from some pretty top-notch angel investors. So, we had that like credibility, but we also still just needed, no way you sliced it, any way you sliced it, we need to raise just so much money to really scale this business. And we quickly had to make a decision to say, okay, well, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to raise the capital we need. We have a high burn because at this time we had like 30 electric cars being deployed, about 30 drivers that were employees, as well as a team. And okay, we said, well, what are we going to do to really like make this thing, to go to the next level? Because we still think there's a lot of value in it. So during the time we were building out an internal tech platform to support the business called Nickelytics. And it was some cool technology that like was used to help sell our advertising on the vehicles.
Okay.
And it was, for instance, one piece of technology we built was the ability to track people that were around the vehicles, as well as the types of consumers, right? And advertisers like that. But we had very limited inventory. So we said, well, what would it look like to actually take this technology and apply it to the gig economy, right? Because it's already this emerging, growing market.
Yeah.
And they need additional income streams. So we started to pilot that back in June, and we quickly realized that it would work. And it was much more favorable in regards of like the operational overhead, as well as the capital that's required to deploy it. And once we kind of had some validation on it and some customers' belief in it, we ended up pivoting the business entirely. So we went from 5 cities, rideshare, like 7 days a week, mobile app and everything, to basically nothing, right? So that was July 5th. It was a very, very tough pivot, right? Because we had, at the time raised about $1 million, and we had to tell our investors, like, this is the right kind of approach, right? We obviously try to get their support as much as possible, but when you're running out of capital, you got to move quick, right? And so we made that pivot and focused solely on the core platform and Nickelytics. And so we had the very strict team of like the core founding team and a couple of others to basically go out and validate that this is the right way to grow.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I love the fact that the idea started from this hypothesis that you had while you were traveling, doing something that you're loving. You're like, this is interesting. I think there's something here when it comes to mobility and advertising and being able to monetize in a new way. So I guess what was the hardest, not hardest, but like what was one of the challenges that you really faced when you were, making that pivot? Obviously not an easy decision, but like can you talk a little bit about that process and the pivot specifically? Yeah,
happy to. No matter how you slice it, it was very, very hard, right? Because, when you're spending, the amount of capital that we were spending, right? So some businesses didn't seem like that much, but for early stage startups, it was like, it really was the thing that kept me up at night, right? Like, I'm like, man, this is so much money, and we need to, really become a fundraising machine, right? We calculated about $200 million is what we would need to get to exit. And, first time founder, right? And someone that's been pretty like just bootstrapped all my other ventures. My mind just doesn't think that way. It's very hard to come to grasp with that. And so it's kind of like having this a bit of validation, right? So one of our investors, for instance, like one of the first Uber investors, right? And so like, it's like, okay, well, we're having this sense of validation, but at the same time, like we're not really matching it with the market, right? And we needed to get that kind of venture-backed partner to believe in what we were doing. And, and they didn't want to necessarily be the ones challenging Uber and Lyft, right? Because they're, cause so much disruption in this industry. And so it was just kind of the battling the two, and then having to really come to grips with like, we need to make the decision that's based off of the data. And I have to be the one that owns it, right? Because like, while it might be hard for this transition period to tell our investors we're doing this, my job is as them as a stakeholder, me as kind of the operator, is to look for their best interests 5 to 7 years out, right? Because that was kind of the agreement, right, that we all have when investing in businesses. We're looking at the exit. And so it was definitely tough. It was definitely trying, very, I would say, emotional, right? Because obviously there's a lot that's impacted, and at the end of the day, it's a high risk. But, it was just looking at the data, looking at how the market was reacting. I knew at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do. We just had to live with those consequences. It was also tough laying off like 30 people. That's certainly not an easy thing, and not something you take lightly, right? Because it's people's livelihoods, and you try to give them as much time as possible, but sometimes business and the unit economics just don't support it. You just have to just make those decisions. And, then going from having the public relations backlash, right? And all the time it was all positivity, right? Because we had this great thesis, but then to have like the news show up the day you announce that you are closing the business down, right? And you're saying like, why? Like they're showing up to record an interview, right? Like that's hard too, because you're like, I don't want to talk about this. Like this is like pretty raw. And then just like the disbelief, right? Because you're like, man, like we were having all this success, and then all of a sudden you had to like just iterate so quickly and so hard. So I would say, like, from an entrepreneur perspective, it's definitely one of the hardest things that I've experienced thus far. But certainly one of the most, I would say, eye-opening and learning situations, because it really, I think, puts us in a place to like understand what it takes to run a business in tough environments, and to make those, those calculated, decisions, and really focus on the data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you're essentially battling on all fronts, having to unfortunately like let go, 30 members of the team that you've grown and been really excited about. And then the public investors, like getting the core team on board.
No, it was definitely, it was a low period, right? Like, I mean, again, like I guess I just stuck my head down and I kept going, but there were certainly moments where you're like, man, like, why? Yeah, but again, I think it's just one of those things of how some entrepreneurs are just wired. That's just all is just keep going, I guess.
Keep going. Well, let's talk about that, Judah, because from there, you guys have done some pretty incredible things, or in an incredible position right now with COVID and everything shut down. I mean, looking like the pivot was a lot smarter than, now than it was a year ago. So.
No, I mean, again, thankfully, where we're at today, I think is a lot of validation that it was the right decision. And I think it's a testament to like trust in the data. I mean, at the end of the day, those investors who were a little upset at first are certainly much, much more pleasurable in regards to where the business is at. Because what we did do, and I think what was important, is we didn't shut the business down, right? We really wanted to prove that the investors made the right investment, and it being in the team, right? It's early stages. I think that's what's critical. It's the team, right? Your idea is a dime a dozen. It's that resilience of like, what are you going to do to overcome the challenges and really just execute, right? And so, we basically had to rebuild the business from scratch starting in July 2019. And really just focused on one thing, right? Becoming self-sustaining from a business model, right? So not focused on outside investment. So we basically bootstrapped the business, spent most of the capital we raised on the last business, started to really focus on just building solid business partnerships and creating the advertising demand and grow from there. And so we went through an accelerator program through the network that we had called Tampa Bay Wave, which was fantastic. Great way to kind of reset and kind of get the mentality of the team back on board of what we're doing and kind of what the new model is and what we're focused on. We were able to onboard some customers that, saw value in the out of home and were, interested in the offer we were providing. And then continued to have a core tech platform that we already had. So we did definitely have some value that we were able to extrapolate from the last business into this model. And so we basically had a chance to just start selling from the start. So we were onboarding customers. I was doing a lot of the just, outbound sales myself. Right around the time that we were finishing Tampa Bay Wave, an interesting kind of piece of the equation was another point of, let's just say, failure to some extent was the year before when we were interviewing with TechStars. So we were actually interviewing with them for the Atlanta position on the last business model. And it was interesting, right? And I thank him to this day. He liked the team a lot. He said he probably talked to me more than any of the other founders. And he ended up passing. And the sole reason he passed, he said, I think you guys are the right people. I just don't have conviction in the business model. So at the time, you're like, oh, how could you not? This is the best business model ever. But then a year later, you're like, oh, yeah, that was not the right model to scale, right, without just significant capital. And so we were close to the TechStars community, but got introduced to the smart mobility program that they were starting in Turin, Italy. That was 100% focused on all things smart mobility and automation, like automotive types of industries. And connected really well with their managing director. And it just all of a sudden became like such a clear fit. And it really was even a better opportunity than the one in Atlanta because it was industry specific. So started talking with them and then got the offer to join the TechStars program back in January 2020.
Nice. Yeah. So that's, it looks like that. I guess that managing director and at Atlanta kind of knew something was onto something there. And I think it's interesting, as you mentioned, ideas are a dime a dozen. His comment to you guys was that feel like you guys are the right team to do this. And I think that shows in the way that you've handled the pivot and been able to get into a couple different accelerator programs and, sort of excel at this new model using the data and like using everything that you've learned to go and still work on a similar thesis to what you originally had around advertising and mobility.
Yeah. And I think as founders, it's super critical to be self-aware, right? So obviously from a personal perspective, I think that's one of the most critical things. And something we look at a lot when we're hiring a team, right, is like, we want to hire rock stars, but the thing is like not everyone's going to be great in every single domain. So like just be very, very self-aware at like, okay, well, is this a good kind of opportunity for me to expand my skills? Is this something that I shouldn't be focused on? Or is there someone better who can help drive this? And so we just try to have that like open, let's just say collaboration and truly be like communicative around that. And that's the same thing with the business model too. Like it's obviously like you have to test and you have to pilot and you have to try things, but at the end of the day, like you have to be looking to see if that is truly the best way to grow the business. And, I think that's one thing we were able to look at, right, is with that as kind of one of the, the signals of saying like, wow, if they really did like us, they liked the team, had this, this quote unquote traction, why didn't it work? And you have to take a step back and let's just say, look at your baby that you love so much and you have so much emotion with, and to see like, well, is that the best way to grow? And I think that's was certainly a way for us to still achieve our mission with just a more refined, better unit economics and better scalable business, and actually create larger impact. Because if we can have, help companies now, to get to profitability, and we can really help these cities, find new ways of alternative transportation, and do that much quicker, much faster. I think that's a winning formula that allows us to really carry out our mission just with a slightly different business model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes sense. You're providing the piece that's key in order to have the business model that you were essentially looking at before be sustainable. And so being able to provide that to other folks, I think is incredible. So what was it like? So you get into TechStars in Italy, in Turin, Italy. This is also about the time that the world starts going a little crazy. We, have a pandemic. Like, talk about like the experience just in general through TechStars, and kind of what you've taken away from that. And then obviously curious to get the lens of, how the program wrapped up with COVID.
Yeah. So first of all, one thing I want to make mention, I saw that it's super critical to our business. So when I started the Nickel Ride, I was a solo founder, and obviously like that worked to some extent. But whenever I pivoted the business, one thing that was super critical that I knew that we needed, right, was a technical co-founder. So my CTO at the time at the Nickel Ride, I ended up offering him a co-founding position. And I knew that he was a core piece of what we were building and a core piece of being able to execute what we want to do on a large scale team. And that also creates a little context for that position, right? So, we finished Tampa Bay Wave, had some great connections there, started working with larger advertisers, really got plugged in, got the support of the Tampa Bay community, got a couple of angel investors from there. And a place where we felt like we could call home, right? Because once we shut down the Nickel Ride, we were in Fort Myers just because that was kind of part of where I was working at Gartner. And we, there wasn't necessarily a thriving startup community, let's just say. And we thought Tampa was a great way to kind of enjoy that Florida sunshine that we've all come to love, but also to be in an environment that has a community, the culture that we're, all kind of, open to and wanting. So once we got the TechStars opportunity, in Italy, it was interesting, right? Because obviously Italy is not in America and we're an early stage business and there's tons of opportunities in the States. We decided that it was the right way to go because, again, in the mobility sector, but also my co-founder, Sven, he's originally from Germany, right? So we've always kicked around this idea, well, this model could work really well in Europe because of just the way that they look at mobility and how like the dynamics of it there is rapidly changing, right? Much less car ownership, much more open to shared mobility. So we did it. We said, let's go. got there at the end of January, and worked in an area or in the heart of Turin, Italy, at a just amazing co-working space called OGR, which is this old train station that the city acquired, invested about $200 million in rebuilding. So like the most just beautiful, inspirational like train station converted into high technology, like co-working, collaboration space. So yeah, we were there, kicked things off with 10 other startups. 7 of them were international, from I think of the 10 startups, I think there were 8 different countries. So an amazing experience to just be like thrown into a world where people were working on like cutting edge mobility sectors, and most of them were around like deep tech, automotives, and we were the ones that focused on just the advertising kind of sector and helping to subsidize the cost. So an amazing experience, amazing founders, amazing talent, all around, and like energy was at an all-time high at that point, I would say.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And it sounds like that's a great place to be, because you've got all these mobility companies that essentially could be your partners, right? Like they're all working on a different piece of the puzzle than what you are, which is the advertising piece. Yeah. And like, it sounds like that was a pretty incredible spot to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like they're all very, very, competent other like founders, right? And so like there was certainly the business of applications to the models where it's like, hey, this makes a lot of sense with your partner. Yeah. There's ways of doing it, but also to just being able to, have this kind of sounding board, right, where you can have unfiltered advice, feedback, discussions, and around just some of the challenges, opportunities, just building that connection was certainly a great experience, and one that we're still obviously, fostering to this day.
Yeah. So would you say that that's one of that's the highlight? Is that sort of like the biggest value add, or like what would you say is like the biggest value add from the TechStars program so far?
Yeah. I would say, again, we just finished the program at the end of April, so pretty fresh off of it. So still to be determined. But I would say hands down the biggest value add that we have experienced, outside of like our managing director relationship, is mentor madness, right? So for those who aren't familiar, and logically you think of it, and I was guilty of this. I was like, I don't know if this is that efficient. You have 3 weeks at the start of the program to where you meet 120 executives, leaders in the space, or just various partners that are called mentors, right? And they basically, you get set up for speed dating. Okay. And you have like, I think right around 15 meetings a day over a 3-week span, and each meeting is 20 minutes. So you really just hone in on like your pitch, your value proposition, and then you try to have 2 or 3 asks, right? So you get the insight into who that's going to be with, and you try to ask them those right questions. And like, by day, I mean, it's exhausting. It's like, it's rough, because it ends by 1 p.m. Then you have all your follow-ups to do, and you have all of your networking, and then you have like sometimes programming in the evening, and then you're also running a business too, right? Like we were growing back in the States. Yeah. But I would say like it really teaches you how to run an efficient meeting, how not to take any kind of meeting for granted, because you don't know what's going to come from that. But also it just validates, and I think it just opened our eyes into just how vast the network of TechStars is, and really find out that there's not many people you cannot get a meeting with if you just have a conviction or like a why as to why you're trying to get that. So I would say the mentors, and then the way it ends is you try to narrow it down to about 4 to 5 lead investors who are going to spend an hour with you at least a week to really work on your business, right? So we were able to have some of the top like VC in Europe be on our lead investor, lead mentors, as well as, a company called We Taxi that was, fastest growing taxi aggregator, worked with us very, very closely. So these are like strong partnerships that are going to go beyond, and strong friendships that are going to go beyond just the TechStars program. So I would say if I had to boil it down to like what's the top thing, like that mentor madness was certainly it. And those are all people we keep in touch with like on a weekly basis. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you definitely get pretty good about explaining the business if you have only 20 minutes and you're doing it, 120 times in 3 weeks. Yeah.
you get pretty good about your value proposition and what questions you need answered. So
the biggest problem is you forget if you've said that to that person or not yet. You start to question. You're like, have I said this yet? You feel like a bit of a broken record. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of value in that, right? Because you're like, you don't think you can have an impactful meeting in 20 minutes, but the way that you get, and the way they provide coaching feedback is you can get a lot accomplished in that time. And it helps you really to focus on, what's the one or two things to get out of that meeting to move it forward to next steps.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah.
What about challenges? Any challenges that you experienced during TechStars?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was one. Let's just say it was a bit of a challenge. So when we were in the program about week number 7 or 8, right, and we really were not looking at expanding the business into Europe at the time because like I said, we're an early stage startup, and then there's so much opportunity in the States. But what we did see is that there's so much fragmentation in Italy and in Europe around the different mobility providers that there was a real opportunity for us to see if we can figure out the lay of the land and come in and replicate our business. So right now we're putting ads on vehicles. A lot of times those are private vehicles. Well, one of the issues that they have in Italy, or one of the constraints to our business, was the fact that there's a law against private advertising. So we said, okay, well, how can we work with channel partners to create this, this partnership and create a new revenue stream of income for them. And so we quickly saw that there was some opportunity to do that. We signed a pilot with Lytx. We signed another pilot with a micro mobility company that was moving very, very quickly. And so we saw like, hey, we can be kind of first to market here in Europe, really focus on the synergies here while still running the business back home and growing that. But about week number 4, there were some whispers around COVID-19 spreading to Italy. And then week by week, it started to get more and more transparent that it was spreading pretty rapidly. Yeah. And I think week 6 or so, they locked down 1/4 of the country, which was about 2 hours away from where we were at, of Milan. And we quickly saw and heard that it was going to be the rest of the country locked down. And funny story on that, like our biggest concern was the fact that our Airbnb didn't have good Wi-Fi. We had like this little Wi-Fi card, and like we fought tirelessly with our Airbnb host of like, hey, we need real Wi-Fi. But we ended up just passing on it, like, okay, because it just wasn't working well. We were at OGR most of the day, so it worked well to have internet. When we were home, we were just like, let's just drink wine, have some pasta, right? We don't need to be but when it looked like the lockdown was going to happen everywhere, we said, like, we cannot not have the internet, right? Like, we need to have connectivity because the business is growing back home. And so we had to sit in a room, me and my co-founder, and again, he's a complete rock star and can handle a lot of the business, and although his background is in the tech side, we tried to map out kind of all of the scenarios, the pros and cons of like what our plan was, right? Because we didn't want to just go back to the States and just abandon our opportunities and feel like we're just giving it a red or yellow, white flag. So we ended up calculating a plan for me to go back to the States. We were with our significant others; they were there too. I would go back to the States, keep running the business there, and he would go back to Germany, which is where his parents live and he's originally from, and keep kind of running things from a schedule perspective in the European time to build out the network. And at the time, TechStars just moved the program to virtual because it did start to get worse and worse very rapidly. So week number 8, moved to a virtual, 100% virtual for the remaining, I think, 8 weeks or so, or 4 weeks, I want to say. And I was back in the States, and then he was back in Europe, basically simultaneously pushing our both parts of the business forward.
Gotcha. No, yeah, that's tough, but I mean, that's pretty impressive. The fact that you're able to work out how to continue to work both fronts, the European and the U.S. front, and having a German co-founder sounds like it's a strong benefit there.
Yeah, no, it definitely helps. And, it works out well, right? Because the way that this pandemic is spreading, just from a business perspective, it's like the European economy will be open quicker, right? And so we're saying, hey, let's just focus in on those opportunities, continue to grow that. And the connections that we have at TechStars in the smart mobility sector, it provides us with that opportunity. And then obviously once America continues to open back up, we can always kind of circle back around. It was certainly, an adjustment, right? Because again, it's all about the pivot, right? Or iteration. The plan was to be in Italy, right, for the entire duration, spend some time traveling at the end of it. It was tough to kind of have to break up early. But again, I think those past trials, right, that we've gone through really put us in a position to feel like, we're pretty sick when it comes to this type of stuff. Like, you just have to deal with market conditions, like, unfortunately now pandemics, right, and continue to figure out ways to to iterate and make things work.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and it seems like you've got the knack to be able to pivot and deal with adversity. So
it's gonna happen regardless. So I figure you might as well try to deal with it the best you can, because you're not gonna stop it whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, I love that, Judah. I love that. So how do you define success? Like, what does success look like for you?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, if I were to look at what success is, is really putting yourself in a position to where you're achieving the most you personally can, right? So I think that success means different things to different people. I don't think success should look the same. I don't think we should measure success the same, right? I think it really is on a case-by-case person. And I think for me individually, it's that I am creating to the best of my ability, that I am empowering the people who are working with me to their fullest extent, and then I'm finding peace, right? And I think that's an important part that I've found over time, right? No matter what success might look like in your head, you also have to align that with like your your spiritual or your kind of overall being, right? And so I think those are things that, like, still defining, still working through. But I think success is certainly, like, while I'm not there yet, I'm certainly happy and content with kind of the stages of it, because I've always been guilty of looking ahead, and I'm just really now trying to appreciate every stage of the business, even if it is a tough one, because it can always be worse, right? And so I think that's probably how I would define it, and probably would have a different answer here if you asked me in a year from now, because it's something that you're constantly, let's say, iterating on.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you're definitely right. It's definitely different for different folks. And, I like the fact that you talk about having peace, finding peace with where you are and where you want to go. Not that you're not striving to continue to grow and do the things that you want to do, but being content with where you are in the process. So Judah, could you describe your relationship with money as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So money is something that is a necessary piece of that equation. I think while money doesn't make happiness, it certainly, I think, is an important part to achieving your goals and creating success. I know I can't necessarily live out my, dreams as an entrepreneur or expectations as an entrepreneur without money. So I think it's a tool, right? That's kind of my relationship to it. It's like, there's just a certain component into this puzzle that is driven by money, while having money is not going to equate to success, because fundraising, that's the front end of it. It's about what you do next is what's critical. So I kind of just, I try not to have too much of a relationship with it, in the sense of like any particular like direct feeling or attachment to it, but also appreciate the value that it plays in the hierarchy of the organization, right? Because again, like having the fund, doing the fundraise, going bootstrap, now ramping up to do the fundraise again, those are all different, very, very different experiences, right? When you're running a business with no money and then running a business with some capital, it makes you appreciate it, let's just say. So I would say, I just have an appreciation for it, but also hopefully not like any type of unhealthy obsession with it.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a balance. Striking that balance is important. Judah, last couple things. What is the best investment you've made?
Ooh, good question. Best investment, I would say my MacBooks.
Yeah.
And not for the sense of like your traditional return on investment, but I think from what they helped me to accomplish, right, are like super critical, right? And so I'm a big Apple fan myself. So in lack of creativity, I'm going to say my MacBooks.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, it's a good tool. It's an important tool as an entrepreneur.
Right. And they resell for almost what you buy them for later on. So in the sense of traditional investing,
There you
not the
go.
worst investment, right? Better than a car, I think.
Oh yeah, much, much, much more so. Yes, absolutely. What's the dumbest money mistake you've made?
So telling myself here, right after college, when one of those entrepreneur kind of hinges and maybe that feeling of invincibility, I invested like $2,500 on a credit card, like pretty much a get rich scheme on like real estate flipping. And I was like, oh, real estate, like I'm gonna get into that. And I bought it, and it just got the course, like it did get the courses, and it was just complete, just like it looked like a seventh grader written it, and it was just like this terrible. And I tried to get a refund, and I didn't. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm not investing until or in any other kind of platform until I truly do my due diligence. So
Yeah.
that by far was one of the worst investments. I still kick myself for it.
Hey, that's a very important one. Thanks for getting vulnerable there and sharing that one. I know that's tough.
Yeah, that one hurts still.
Judah,
that was a lot of money at that time. Did not have it to just
oh yeah,
throw away.
Yeah, another 2,500, and you could have bought a coffee shop. Like, come on.
I mean, that's half of my coffee shop investment there. Yeah.
Judah, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing everyday Americans when it comes to finances?
Lack of education around finances, right? So same thing. We were guilty of it, like growing up, like no money management. Let's just say education, right?
Yeah.
Like you really aren't taught like credit scores, the importance of credit scores, why you should buy on credit, why you shouldn't buy on credit, how to create a budget, how to save, retirement's real, those types of real just basic structures were not introduced to us as children. And from my understanding, it's not being replicated even to this day. And so I would say just conversation about it is probably one of the biggest things it's facing.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. It's definitely something that you either get it from your parents or an uncle or someone like that, or you don't for the most part. Or you learn it the hard way.
Guilty of that.
So awesome. Well, Judah, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down. I want to leave you the last word. So anything that you'd like to share with the audience, and of course, please let us know how we can support Nickelytics and folks can connect with you if they want on the back end.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. It's great catching up. Big fans of what you all are doing. So I look forward to seeing that grow over at Ostrich. And from, just the Nickelytics perspective, it's an exciting time for us. We're in the process of going through that fundraise. We just hired a couple of top tier ex-TechStars associates to our team. So we're growing on that regard, working with a number of mobility companies around helping to create a new revenue stream for them. So you should be seeing some of that, coming out. So if anyone's interested in connecting around business opportunities, partnerships, feel free to reach out to me. I am on LinkedIn. It's a good platform to go from there. And I would just say, my, advice during this time, right? Because obviously we've all been in quarantine now for about 45 days or so. It's hard to even remember how many days it's been. Is just, hopefully everyone can find at least one positive thing to add to their daily routines and hopefully use this time as a refresh, right? I know it's certainly given us a chance to unplug a little bit more so even than maybe expected. But, we will be back. It will be better and business will be, back to some sense of normality here in the near future. So try to find the positive in this transition period.
Yeah. No, love that. I love that. Well, thanks so much, Judah. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. It was a great time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Excited to see what you guys do. So.
Well, I'm sure it'll be something.
All right. That concludes my conversation with Judah Longgrear, CEO and co-founder of Nickelytics. Now, what I really loved about Judah's story is that he dabbled in entrepreneurship at an early age, just buying a coffee shop at the age of 19 with $5,000, not really knowing what he was doing, managing to kind of scrape through and get his money back out of that business, and then getting into the actual corporate world and seeing what that side of the coin was like, and then moving into startup, pivoting. And I, can only imagine what it's like to build this company that is having a lot of success, seems like it's having success, a ton of positive press, and then to realize that the unit economics don't work and it's not going to scale, and having to let go pretty much your entire staff and have really difficult conversations, not only with, your employees, your investors, but also the press. And, at the same time, trying to convince yourself, and Judah trying to convince himself that this was the right choice based on the numbers and the analytics and the data that they had. And as you can see over the last almost year now, things have really, really taken a turn for the better. And Nickelytics has managed to just do some incredible things and is on a great trajectory. So really, really interesting to hear that kind of thought process of what it's really like. So, that was one of my key takeaways. I'd love to hear what yours are. So please drop a comment and let us know on social media. Well, that's it for the Silicon Alley podcast. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. If you have not already, please like, subscribe, follow the podcast, give us a good review, and share with others that you think would get value. That's it for today. Have a good one, guys. Thanks so much.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying